We're just putting the finishing touches on a $15 million downtown project, undergrounding utilities, new streetscape, sidewalks. We just completed a public safety building, a $32 million public safety building, a $90 million elementary school, a $25 million renovation of one of our commercial highways, which was actually paid for by the state. We are working with the YMCA to bring a YMCA into town. We've preserved over 300 acres of open space, built 2,000 units of housing, which is a very controversial topic, and some of which I wasn't supportive of.
Yeah. Okay, the Jentry Podcast. I know that you will be loving it. We here to break it down so that you start to understand your local government. Who are the leaders? Time to get active, do something about it. Dealing with jobs, the workforce, and affordable housing. Motivate and inspire. Elevate, take it higher. For the next generation. Knowledge is power for your community. Giving you the info that you really need. Time to make a change and a difference. Tune in, don't miss it. It's the Jentry. The Jentry Podcast. The Jentry Podcast. Making a change, switching it up.
Hello, and welcome to the Jentry Podcast today. We have an incredible guest. I'm your host, Jonathan Mason, but more important than that, I have with me Michael Herbert, who is the town manager of the town of Ashland in Massachusetts. But he's more than that. He is a man of many, many experiences. He's lived so much life and so many very, very human experiences to get him to now Ashland, in which he's had over a decade-long career dealing with things like legislation change around his housing, understanding the inner workings of regionalization, and he's here with us today. So before we get too far into it, Michael, how are you doing today?
Hey, Jonathan. Hey, first, thanks for having me on here. I'm really excited to be a part of this, seeing some of your previous podcasts. It's an honor to be on here. And hey, today I'm doing okay. It's budget season in Massachusetts, and I'm assuming it is in most parts of the country. But that always brings with it some special tensions. This year, a little bit more than most, just because we have a ballot measure, a tax measure on the ballot this upcoming May. Just really quickly, not to get too policy wonky, right? But in Massachusetts municipalities are limited to how much they can raise property taxes by 2.5% a year. And obviously, when you have fixed costs that increase at a substantially higher rate, puts a little budget pressure on. And so in Massachusetts, municipalities have the ability through a ballot vote of the electorate to override that 2.5 cap by whatever amount makes sense at the time for the purposes. But we're talking about one of those. And it's just, there's a lot of coordination involved in that just making sure everybody is being communicated to, and everybody's kind of working on behalf of the town.
This is great. No, on two fronts. The typical human response is, "Oh, I'm doing fine," but no, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And then since we're into it, I will figure out why Ashland is the the best place to live in the United States and what's the secret sauce. But before that, I'd love to hear. So what is the measure that's on the ballot? Why are you guys looking at increasing that tax above that 2.5%? What's the purpose, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. Really, what got us to this point is the increasing costs related to health insurance and other fixed costs, contractual increases, just increases in like subscription prices for software that can sometimes reach double digits. And after multiple years of that, it becomes unsustainable when your main revenue source can only grow at 2.5%. When your health insurance budget, which is decent size, when that goes up by 12%, and that's not, we're one of the lucky ones. I know some communities that are looking at increases of 20% in health insurance. What happens is that puts budgetary pressure on other things like personnel. And so in our specific instance, our schools are really, really in a tough spot in terms of the financials. And, we are as well, not on the municipal side, not as much as the schools. But what we would be looking at if this ballot measure didn't pass, at least on the school side, is layoffs of like 25 personnel. On the municipal side, yeah, we would basically not be able to do any projects. We'd just basically be a bare bones staff that would just be able to keep services like our regular day-to-day services going. But, community development projects, infrastructure projects, all of those would pretty much stop. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So
We're
this
waiting.
this is very serious. What I'm hearing is just natural increases, even just naturally inflation around things can outpace that 2.5%. And if that isn't potentially raised, we're talking about cutbacks, not just the human costs, like obviously losing people that have pledged themselves to work for schools and for the municipality is horrible from a human aspect of it, but then also from the municipality standpoint, infrastructure projects stopping, all the special projects that actually make and improve the community stopping. Wow. So I can understand why there is a little bit of heaviness around this budget cycle and this tax measure on the ballot. But as I promised our audience, I did want to shift gears and get on to the positive. So what is the special sauce, the secret sauce? Excuse me. What makes the town of Ashland the best place to live in the United States?
Teamwork. Teamwork. Ashland is the home, I think, of some of the smartest residents in Massachusetts because they know value. We provide an incredible amount of services for the taxes that they pay. And the way we're able to do it is through teamwork. Schools and town working side by side, our departments working together, people picking each other up when they might be down. We run a lean staff, so there's a lot of camaraderie here. But beyond just the staff, we have a dedicated group of volunteers that sit on boards and committees and do other things to help make this community what it is. And so that is Ashland's secret sauce, is the way that we can, through teamwork, do things that we just wouldn't be able to do if we were just single entity silos.
Love that. And I think that coordination and that working together harkens back to the first thing we were talking about. When you spoke of potentially having to raise taxes, it was making sure that everybody is made aware and understands. And that speaks to that collaborative effort, not just within the municipality, but within the municipality and then out to the community members. I love to hear that the teamwork inside the house and outside of the house is the special sauce. Now, one thing I also always say is you get to learn a lot about a community through their leadership. So, Michael, and don't shortchange us. Please give us the long version. What was childhood like? Did you always know you wanted to get into public service, and how did that journey actually progress to where you are now?
Jonathan, I am nowhere near like what I was when I was a child, both geographically and personality wise. It's such an interesting question. Short answer is no. I never grew up wanting to be a town manager. I didn't know what a town manager was. And I wasn't interested in government. In fact, I actually grew up in a household that really was not government friendly, if you will, or didn't necessarily see the value of it. I grew up down south in Tennessee, and wonderful place to grow up in a natural environment and with people and some of the best people I know. And my childhood was it was interesting. My father passed when I was 3, and my mom raised me as a single mom, never got remarried. We lived out in the woods in Tennessee on, a few acres and had some farm animals and stuff. Yeah, that was my young childhood life. Didn't have people around me. I mean, I lived on a gravel road. My closest friend was a mile away down the road. So I didn't have the experience of playing with neighborhood kids and stuff that some folks do, but I did have the experience of playing in the woods and using my imagination and creating. And that's probably the through line of my whole life through all my varied experiences is creativity and how that's always played a role. And I could even show you how that works today, but we'll get to that, right? But yeah, I was fortunate enough to go to a very nice school in the big city of Chattanooga, where I grew up, Chattanooga, Tennessee, a nice school called the Macaulay School. And that was a good experience, a unique experience as well. I got to study with people and play sports with people from all over the world, Africa, Saudi Arabia. I mean, this little hick kid from Pikeville, Tennessee, having lunch and just sharing space with people from other parts of the world. Just, gosh, a kid like me having that experience was awesome. I also got involved in music. Um, and also got involved in the substances at that time, which unfortunately played a significant role in my life, not necessarily in a positive way. I went right after school, instead of going to college, I went on tour with a band. You get an 18-year-old with a guitar and license to do damage. Let's put it that way. That's not a recipe for success. Let's put it that way, at least with me. Plenty of people had it, but unfortunately, it led to some pretty dark times for me, and not very interesting ones, but just very dark. And I ended up going in basically a flash of brilliance and going, hey, let's move. We'll figure things out. So I moved up to Boston to go to Berklee College of Music. And man, if I thought the city of Chattanooga in Tennessee was a grand cultural experience, coming up to New England was very interesting. It just, Berklee was a great experience the time I spent there, except for my drinking. And unfortunately, that won in that battle. I spent a short time wandering Boston, kind of figuring things out. Ended up in some social service programs, a shelter, halfway house system. I ended up getting sober, and it's just been a friggin' rocket ship since then. Got sober, got on my feet, got a steady job, met the love of my life, my wife. We got married, and I decided to go back. We made a home in Winthrop, Massachusetts, and that's where I started getting involved in the community a little bit more on the community relations side, community development side, I should say. And at some point, I was about 30. I was like, you know what? I think I want to do this as a career. And so I went back to school to UMass Boston. It's just a wonderful institution, doesn't get enough credit. I did 90 credits in 3 semesters, which was, obviously I had to put in a lot of work, but the people at UMass Boston had to put in a lot of work too. My teachers did. They put in a lot of extra work to help me accelerate my progress. And I was elected to student government, and things just really started blossoming then. Went from there to graduate school at UMass Boston at the McCormick Graduate School. And it was my classmates there I'm still in contact with. We graduated in 2009, which was also the birth of my daughter that year. And from there, I got my first job in government, if you will, working at the Collins Center for Public Management, which was a new think tank for government that was started at UMass Boston. So I was, again, really lucky being at the right place at the right time and doing some work there, did staff the Lieutenant Governor's Regionalization Advisory Commission, did some grant programs. From there, I got hired to go to the city of Lowell as a management analyst. And from there, I got to start working in finance. And I really started seeing, I had studied more planning, and I really thought I wanted to be a planner. But then I started realizing, hey, Jonathan, guess what? You can plan all you want, but unless you have the money to do things, you can't do anything. So I was like, hey, the money aspect is interesting here in terms of how government works. And then I started getting involved in more administration and finance, and I had great mentors in Lowell. Bernie Lynch as the city manager, Tom Moses was the CFO. I learned a lot from both of them, and just the environment that Lowell was. And is. It's a unique city, America's first planned city. It's just so cool. It's got so much history. From there, I spent a little time in the city of Newton, and I saw this job open up. It was the assistant town manager and finance director job in Ashland, and they had just hired a town manager who had no municipal experience, but was a general in the Air Force. And he hired me on. And so we were a management team that had all of 5 years of municipal experience between us at the time. But I learned so much about leadership from him. I mean, he's a general. He's a fighter pilot. I mean, every single thing that you can think of, like Top Gun to the extreme. But he was an incredible leader, incredible administrative genius. Tony Schiavi was his name. Tony could keep just the right amount of balls in the air, enough to keep things going, but not enough to overburden the organization. I've realized that more and more the longer I've done this job, and just how special a skill that is. And so he left to run for Senate 2.5 years later, and the board asked me if I would be willing to step up, and I agreed. And that was January 16th of 2016. Ta-da! Here we are. And here I am with you 10 years later.
Wow. I appreciate you giving us the real story. It is important for me and everything that I do to humanize the leaders of communities. And as I open this, you've had some truly human experiences that many people can identify with, but you also have a very American story, that resilience that we pride ourselves in, the willingness to work as hard as we can. And I know substance abuse and addiction are not always something that you can just power through to get to the other side. I recognize that, but it is still beautiful to see somebody that understood that they needed to get help, who did the hard work, who got the help. One other thing I wanted to tease out, to have a leader in the township that can appreciate the services of a community because he had to utilize them in his life. Oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes we can see people that are leading services or leading organizations in which they had probably never even understood or had to
Yeah.
utilize these services, and they're making very big decisions about them. So it is beautiful to see that. And then to your municipal career, wow, being at the cutting edge of a very thoughtful and powerful think tank that would put out some great, and I've had a chance to actually look at some of the pieces that were put out of that think tank, to leading with somebody that didn't have municipal experience, but was just a great leader, but you were able to bring that. And now a decade later, you are seasoned and you have been able to lead for so long and bring so much of the town of Ashland. So before we jump in, I did want to just say thank you for sharing your story, because it is very important that people get to see and identify with leaders of community. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate that. Sometimes I feel like I lean on that story too much, but it is an important part of my story. And I think it's an important part, like you said, of a lot of people's stories. And so that's why I share it, is just so people understand, yeah, things can get pretty bad, but things can be pretty good after things have been pretty bad. Appreciate that.
I hear you. And there's been things that have happened in my life that, and some of them I shared with you in our first call, and I can feel like I'm like leaning on that, or but no, it's something that, like, we had one thing that happened in our childhood that we both shared, losing a father. It makes you able to connect with people, understand where they're coming from. And with something like addiction, that is something that is very prevalent. And to see the other side of it, you never know who's going to be watching this podcast and just say, hey, like, I know I've had some dark days, but they may not always be this dark. So I do, so as much as I can champion you to continue telling that story, I would appreciate that. And I know many of the people that get to hear your voice would appreciate that.
Thank you.
Now, shifting to the X's and O's, and I know you've had a decade of experience of going through this. What are the strategic priorities of Ashland going forward right now?
Jonathan, that is such a good entry into such a, we could talk for days about this. We're at a unique inflection point in the sense that there was a vision that was put forward, and we've accomplished a lot of those things. And we're now at that period where it's like, okay, what's next? We have completed a comprehensive plan with the community. It was a 2-year-long process. That length of time was necessary to gain the consensus needed to get something that we agreed on through. I think also what might have happened, unfortunately, is that we lost a little momentum for that vision that was generated in the very early stages of that process. So we need to, from my perspective, and I think our select board would agree, once we get kind of our financial situation, once we know what we have to work with, our job is going to be to basically build our staff. Again, we had a lot of transitions last year. And so we have a lot of very talented, but not very experienced people in some very critical positions right now. Get them a little more up to speed And then we can start the process of operationalizing that comprehensive plan. And then that vision will start coming to life. And then we will start saying, okay, well, what does this goal actually translate to in terms of projects that we can do, that we have the capacity to do? And then we have basically, I think about like drawing or something, you got like your little stick figure. We got the stick figure. And so the next couple of years are really going to be putting the clay around that and shaping it and seeing what that looks like. So, our strategic priorities right now are make sure that we can build know what we have to work with from resources, build the team that we have within the resource structure that we have, build the car, and then we got to drive the car and figure out, what those actual projects are that lead to those goals and priorities being realized.
Wow. It sounds like a lot of big things are coming to fruition in Ashland. And it's funny, it kind of harkens back to when you started. It seems like you have some people that are, and they don't have maybe all the experience, but they have a lot of know-how. They have a lot of grit and determination. And they are going to be the ones to see Ashland forward for the next decade. So that definitely gets me excited. Now, you also kind of spoke of one of the topics that we've been looking at when it comes to this season of the podcast. Sometimes people are called to do more with less, or to get scrappy or innovative or utilize technology, work with people in the region to achieve goals. Do you have some examples of how you guys have had to, quote unquote, do more with less at times?
Yeah. I think probably the most best succinct example, how many adjectives can you throw in one sentence, is probably our IT department. So when I started, we had 5 IT staff support the school department, and we had 1 IT staff person support the municipal departments. 2017, the superintendent and I worked along with our IT director, Paul Carpenter, to work on an agreement that consolidated those services. So the incumbent on the town side, IT, he ended up taking another position, which left a vacancy. And so we saw that as an opportunity to eliminate that position, combine with the school department, and basically reduce by 1 FTE the total headcount, but still maintain the services that we have. And I can tell you, you talked about special sauce earlier, and I said teamwork. And I think what the building blocks of teams are individuals. And so we have some great individuals here too that are great team players. And Paul Carpenter, our IT director, is probably the epitome of that. We have 5 IT professionals supporting 600 full-time staff. And because they do the schools, a student body of 2,900 throughout the district. So when COVID is happening and all the kids are getting Chromebooks, our team of 5 deployed that. I should not say that everybody pitched in on that one, but that's a great example. Another example, and Jonathan, I know you're really interested in regionalization. I can't take credit for this, but one of the things that was done a few years before my arrival was in Massachusetts, each municipality is required to have a veteran service officer. So someone that veterans stateside at home can use as a resource. Again, all towns are required by state statute to have one. We found a way to combine with 3 other towns our resources. And so we have a set of personnel that staff that 4-town district. We created a district essentially. That's another way. But I think, and this gets a little wonky. Is it okay if I get a little wonky?
Get as wonky as you need.
Okay, we can get a little wonky there. So a broad measure of efficiency, this is the old performance management guy coming out, is expenditures per capita. So simple formula, where your total expenditures divided by how many people are in your town. It doesn't give you all the right answers. It helps you ask the right questions, though. And we have one of the lowest per capita expenditures, actually the second lowest of our 18 municipality region. And you ought to see what all we do, Jonathan. We're just putting the finishing touches on a $15 million downtown project, undergrounding utilities, new streetscape, sidewalks. We just completed a public safety building, a $32 million public safety building, a $90 million elementary school, a $25 million renovation of one of our commercial highways, which was actually paid for by the state. We are working with the YMCA to bring a YMCA into town. We've preserved over 300 acres of open space, built 2,000 units of housing, which is a very controversial topic, and some of which I wasn't supportive of. And yeah, the Riverwalk, I mean, there's so many. We've done $200 million in capital projects, our tiny but mighty team. And it is because of teamwork. It is because we have a great group. We have at the base of it is our staff, just a great staff. We have great volunteers. And then we also, I'm trying to remember everybody that's a part of this, but our legislative delegation in the State House, Representative Jack Patrick Lewis, and our Senator Karen Spilka, who is actually the Senate president, have been very helpful in terms of getting grants and other resources. So, man,
Wow.
yeah, you're right. We've created an HR department, an economic development department, communications team, and we've all done it without adding to the general fund.
Yeah. It truly shows that teamwork that you were speaking about in a sense. It's like and I don't want to misquote, but to achieve $200 million worth of capital projects with the size of the team that you have, there has to be a level of coordination and that efficiency that you brought up to achieve that, because you only have so many people, but you're delivering such high level services to those people. And then at a fraction of the budget, it sounds like, compared to
Mhm.
your local peers at the second lowest, to be exact. That is very, very impressive. And again, speaks to the first thing you said, that teamwork. Now, one thing I do want to double click on, because it is very important. You mentioned housing
Mm.
and how you guys have built, it sounds like, 2,000 units. Across the nation, housing is, you said, controversial. I'll just say hot button issue pretty much everywhere. So before we get into the building of the units, what does housing look like in Ashland from a housing stock? Do you guys have a lot of land, or is it all the way built out? Just generally, what does housing look like in Ashland? And then I'll get to more granular questions.
Sure. Yeah. So the landscape has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And then even if you extrapolate that, probably the last 40 or 50 years. Ashland, just like many municipalities in Massachusetts, is an older community. And so there's older housing stock in terms of like single family homes and everything that's prevalent here. Throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s and even the early 2000s, the town grew by leaps and bounds with typical suburban sprawl type expansion. New neighborhoods being put in with cul-de-sacs and all of that stuff. And so a lot of that happened in, like a stretch between, mid 70s and mid 2000s. Since that time, we've seen really an explosion, I think, in apartments. And I should also point out, Ashland in the East saw a huge expansion of housing in the form of condos, fourplexes, 4 units to a building. There was one prominent developer in town who did a lot. But just fast forwarding again to today, a lot of it's multifamily apartments and of very high density, 150 units up to 250 units. In one case, we have one that's built that was almost 400 units. And so it's controversial in Ashland and a lot of similar towns in Massachusetts because it starts changing the physical character of the community. It and that's difficult for a lot of people, including me sometimes, to change. What I have tried to do is push housing, because housing, the way Massachusetts is set up, housing is going to get built. It just gets made extremely hard and expensive, hence the housing costs. But yeah, it's in, I forgot my point, but that I was going to make. But what's interesting is in Massachusetts, we just had a report come out that show we have more people leaving than coming in the state. And a huge driver of that is housing costs. And the state has been really, really, really forthright in pushing more housing development and kind of overriding cities and towns. What I'm still trying to understand is how the building of apartments can help an issue where we have people leaving because of the high cost of single family homes. A lot of people who are leaving to go get the picket fence in the yard and the single family home in an affordable range. It's just not affordable here. They're not looking at a condo or an apartment. So I'm still trying to understand the state's logic in terms of how building a whole lot of apartments solves our housing problem. But a lot of people smarter than I am working on that one. I remember what I was going to say. What I have tried to do is push the housing, because it is going to get built, away from green space, taking down trees and stuff that hasn't been developed, and pushing it more towards redevelopment of dilapidated properties. And so that way you're killing two birds with one stone. You're renovating properties, and everything that comes with that. And at the same time, you're producing housing that is going to be built in your community. So that's been my approach.
Think he said a lot of interesting things there. A couple that I want to potentially hear more. The interplay between state and local, and how that can kind of come down and you just have to deal with it. But then at the same time, there may be a disconnect between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law when it comes to we're losing people. I'm guessing, earlier stage families to maturing families that don't necessarily want to, not that there's anything wrong with it, but want to expand. Like I have a young family, and the impetus is to get my young son more space so he can be a kid, get him to a community. So I can totally see how the disconnect is there. And then the next part of that is 110%. If you can push that to redevelopment, to areas that may have properties that need to be redone, like you keep people around existing infrastructure. So there is a lot of as you already know, a lot of great logic around that. I'd want to just touch base with the state. How does that actually work? So did they put in like a piece of legislation that created like a by right type situation? What was the actual push, and how did that affect kind of like the development community being able to do more apartments?
Wow, I can get really wonky here. This is cool.
Please.
So the state has had a law on the books since 1960, 40B. And one of the reasons why it is difficult, it's can be difficult to build housing around here, not impossible, but difficult, i.e. expensive. And what makes it expensive is permitting. And a lot of communities in 1969, especially some of the wealthier suburbs, were interested in using concepts and tools such as zoning. And I'm assuming you're familiar with that concept, what zoning is. Um, and in using that as a way to keep neighborhoods, let's just say, very static and homogenized. And the state did not feel like that was the right thing to do. And it created this law called Chapter 40B. And in essence, what it says is that if a state or if a community's housing stock, if 10% of its housing stock if less than 10% of its housing stock is deemed affordable by the state, and that's a classification, affordable, then under 40B, a developer can come and build basically anything they want and just ignore a community's zoning laws, as long as they do 25% of the units as affordable. So it, and we've got 3 of those going on right now. It is the ultimate in being overruled. You've got very little say. And so that's really tough. And then most recently, the most controversial thing has been in the last couple of years, which the legislature passed. Basically, it's called the MBTA Communities Law. MBTA is our local commuter rail system. And that essentially said, if you have a commuter rail station within your community or adjacent to your community, you're required to zone a certain portion of your community for high density housing by right. So that's another instance where the state has come in and basically told communities what to do with and how they should develop their communities.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. It I know you're the original thing that I pointed out is you want to push those developers to areas that need to be of more like redevelopment. How much say do you have in that? It sounds like, well, at least with the first kind of ordinance or piece of legislation, if the affordability isn't there and they promise some affordability, they could literally go to any parcel that they can acquire, or is there like still
Oh,
some type?
yeah. So, for example, a few years ago, there was one proposed um, that it was on a 7-acre parcel in total. They were going to use about 3 acres. There was a single family home on there, an older one, and that place was zoned for only single family homes. Well, they got a permit under 40B to do 120 units. The town ultimately ended up buying that property, and is in the process of converting it for a different use. Uh, but yeah, it doesn't matter. It could be a 1-acre parcel, and if you can fit 20 units on it, hey, as long as 5 of them are affordable, you can do it. Doesn't matter about setbacks or anything like that.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, that's the next setbacks, parking, a lot of different things that kind of go into that process. Wow, very, very interesting. And this is something I don't often do. I like to share, kind of the flow of the, the podcast as much as possible. So feel free to say no. No is a fair answer and a complete sentence. What should the legislation look like, or what do you think would be more advantageous or more fair to local municipalities? Like, how would you potentially create the piece of legislation so the spirit of the law is achieved, but maybe not as rigid?
Well, I think, Jonathan, and this is in any situation where you're trying to apply one rule to a whole bunch of different entities, but you're trying to craft something that is essentially a compromise between everybody. And so what happens is that each community might lose more than others, basically, in that compromise, if you look at it. And could you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely love to because it is difficult. So the current law allows pretty much anybody that is promising affordable units, I guess was it 25% affordable units,
Yeah.
they can find any parcel of land and build. And then off even I'll take it a step further. If they're on an MBTA line, they can do any high density land. Are there any pieces of legislation that you think may be more of, take your words, be more of a compromise to the municipalities and address the spirit of the law? So making sure that families are able to find adequate and safe and affordable housing, but maybe not be, for lack of a better term, as heavy handed or as rigid for local municipalities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think probably in our situation, it felt especially egregious with these 40Bs because we did have plans and we proactively worked to get to that 10% affordability number. That would have given us safe harbor. And what happens, we permitted those units. We went through, in some cases, years-long permitting processes, development agreements, and everything to get these things permitted and lined up and ready to go. But the capital markets, the private sector didn't want to move on them. They didn't want to build them. And so we couldn't get credit for them unless they were built. I think, and maybe I'm only saying this because it applies so particularly to us, but if you could modify the legislation where you give more credit to communities that are actively trying to achieve the goals that the state, hands out or mets out. I think that's important. I really wish there was a mechanism where people could look at Ashland and say, yeah, you are trying. You've done your part. It's just the private market, the private sector hasn't, I'm sorry, kept up its end of the bargain, but I mean, it's what made sense for them at the time. I just wish we had a little more credit for that. And I think that would go a long ways.
That makes sense to me. Just some type of mechanism to address the fact that sometimes you can do the work and be in process. And with my my day job, I get to speak to both municipalities and developers. And sometimes things fall through. Sometimes things take longer. And yeah, sometimes the project made sense in 2021, but doesn't make sense in 2024.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely some wiggle room. So
Mm.
I want to take you off of the the hot seat, and I know I threw
Okay.
something at you that I did not expect. So I know you didn't expect, and I appreciate you taking the time to field that question. But these next questions are a little bit more fun, and I'll pull up my list. These are our last chance games. So
Okay.
these are rapid fire. Think it comes from improv. So the first thing that pops into your mind. I'll do
You don't
three
want
at
to
a
know the
time.
first thing that pops into my mind. We don't want to play that
No.
game. That
So
gets me in a lot of trouble, man.
hey, well, it is what it is. So
Okay.
we'll do the three at a time. I'll ask them quick. You just say what pops to your head, and then at the end of the three, we'll come back and you can clarify, or even I've had people change. You know
Okay.
what? That's not the answer I want to go with. So
This is cool. I like
I'll
it.
read these off and we can go. So the first one is, what is a policy that looks good on paper but is nearly impossible to execute?
That looks good on paper, but is impossible to execute well. Can I add that to it?
Yes, yes, yeah.
40B. Just what we were talking about.
Well done. Well
Yeah.
done. What role do you not have on staff that would instantly change outcomes?
Finance, an analyst.
Important. And then this is a two-parter. What tasks do you think AI could help you with? And then what tasks do you think AI could never help you with?
That it could help with email management, which Lord knows I need help with. What it can't help with is, man, I got to be succinct here. They can't detect phenomenological inquiry. That's a big word. And yes, I do know what it means. I didn't just use it for fun. Well, I get a chance to explain it later.
Yeah, we'll come back. So let's start with the first one, which I got a kick out of. What policy looks good on paper but is impossible to execute well? You said 40B, the real estate. Could you explain that? Just
Yeah.
I know you've gone into it, but what did you mean by that?
Just very simply, I don't think it has achieved what it sought out to achieve.
I can understand that. And then the next one, what role would increase outcomes immediately? A finance analyst. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, and I might change my mind on that one.
Feel
Uh,
free.
I'm going to change it and it would be hard to pick one department. Middle management, like those assistant director types. We don't have those. Sometimes we have a department head is the assistant department head and is also the clerical staff at the same time. So where we really miss a lot is in that mid-tier management.
Wow. This is separate. I have two questions. How many total staff do you have
On the municipal side, we've got
on the
100
municipal side?
on 150. When you
Okay.
add in the
Okay.
school and the teachers and everything, it goes to 600. But I have like budgetary oversight over everything, but the superintendent and the school committee, they maintain control over the schools.
Understood. Okay, that answers. I was very curious to see how it was totally structured. And then, what is something that AI could help you with, and what is something that AI could never help you with? Please explain both.
Yeah. So I get a lot of email and I still haven't learned a good way to manage it effectively. And I don't like that because sometimes I miss emails and stuff. It's just what it can't help with is so one of the things that I've recently done is went and got my certification in coaching. And so now I went through, learned the Gestalt modality. Um, and which is based in Gestalt theory, and really, which is about part of it is that phenomenological inquiry and perception. And so when I'm talking to you, or if I'm in like a coaching conversation that I'm talking to you, I'm looking and basically seeing how your facial expressions are, if you're telling me about something very difficult, but you're smiling, like why are you smiling when you're talking about something so difficult? Like earlier today when I noticed your energy just completely changed. Things like that. AI can't detect that in a conversation. And you learn so much about people, communicate so much with nonverbal expressions. You just miss that in AI.
No, that's a great one because we joked. You're like, why? Like we were talking about why my energy shifted. I don't like going through the administrative things of the podcast. Yeah, exactly. It's just not that interesting to me. But as soon as it was time to go, I'm like, okay, I get to learn, hear, connect. This is why I do what I do, not the administrative task. So no, you do learn what gets people excited. So we're headed to our next three. The first one is, what is the hardest truth you wish residents understood about timelines and trade-offs?
Timelines, it always takes longer in government just because it is designed to slow things down on purpose and be very careful. And you can't run it like a business. It's so nice to say, but it is built on completely fundamentally different principles. And everything I run is a cost center that operates at a loss. In the private sector, sorry, I'm explaining things again. In the private sector, when that happens, if it's not providing value somewhere else, you just get rid of it. You can't do that with police or fire or DPW. So I guess I don't have to
That's
explain that one anymore.
Oh yeah, no, but it's so important. And the thing that I've learned is government moves at a deliberate pace, and I like the way you said it. It's slowly moves slowly on purpose. There's a point to that, and then yes, those cost centers. I mean, yeah, they may not be making you money, but if you don't have a police department or you don't have education system, I don't think you'll have residents for very long. So that makes a ton of sense. The next one is talking about development a little bit. So, what is the most common hidden development constraint when you talk about building housing? So, utilities, ownership, zoning, or politics?
Actually, Jonathan, I'm going to say financing.
Okay. I look forward to unpacking that one, financing. And then the last one in this group is, what is the biggest long-term risk or challenge that you can't address in a 2-year or 4-year election cycle?
Culture.
Again, I look forward to unpacking that. So, yeah, we went through the deliberate pace of business, well, Freudian slip, pace of government.
Yeah.
But now let's go to the development hidden cost. And you said financing. Please expound on that.
The only and Jonathan, all the examples you gave were very valid ones too. And I just think from residents' points of view, what they don't see is I think a lot of times they think these developers are sitting on wads of cash to build these properties, and they're not. Oftentimes, they are raising money in a shareholder equity stage and looking at construction financing and converting that to permanent financing through an institution or some other financing partner. And those are all based on rates. And when your costs of construction are so high because of materials and labor costs, and the financing charges or interest rates are where they have been for the past few years, it just makes it impossible to build things. And it's just, we get a lot of, well, why didn't you put a business in here? Why is it apartments? Number one, government doesn't control the a transaction between two private entities. And a business is going to go where they feel like they're going to make money. If they don't feel like there's the customer base to support it, why is it going to, would you do that? You wouldn't be in business very long. And then nobody's going to loan you money to open a business. So I just wish people understood financing a little bit.
Makes a great point. And then the biggest challenge that you can address in a short term election cycle is culture. Could you explain that one?
Culture is something that takes a decade to build and a week to undo. Wow, how do you put that in words? It's what values underpin your decisions. That's culture, I think. Um, and values, and to make sure that people understand your values takes consistency and it takes time. And one of the, Jonathan, one of the reasons I should have mentioned that has made us so successful is longevity in some of the seats. And not just in staff seats, but in our board seats. I've been in Ashland for 13 years. Two of my five select board members were here when I started as the assistant town manager. There's some longevity here. Unless you have a continuity of vision and a continuity of ideas and projects associated with those, you can't make progress. So you need multiple election cycles, multiple people sitting in those seats, or the same people sitting in those seats sometimes, to actually get something done and carry it through. Because, like you said in our last question, it is slow to get things done.
A great point, and I like how you said that it takes years to build and a week to dismantle. But then that longevity is so important. A lot of the communities that I've seen that have been very successful have had some level of just continuity with board council and then often leadership as well. So the last three questions are pretty fun. I get to give you some free money. So the last three are: with $100,000 added to your budget, what role or challenge or anything would you tackle? If I added $1 million to your budget, what challenge or entity would you tackle? And then the last one: if I gave you unlimited capital, unlimited workforce, unlimited whatever the resource you need for a year, what would be the challenge or entity you?
And what's the first one again, Jonathan? I'm sorry, my ADD is just really cranked up today.
All good, all good. It's a 100,000 the first
100,000.
one,
Yep.
then 1,000,000, then unlimited.
I would say you're asking me today in March of 2026. And I would say, actually, for the $100,000, I would just say give that to the school department and let them put it to the best use right now. And if I had $1 million, I would probably say, okay, take 800 of that and put it towards the schools. And I need 200K to start a buildings and grounds department. We don't have one. And so our capital needs and our facility needs are going unmet. More importantly, we're not seeing down the road of what could happen in planning for those. And then unlimited cash, man, this is easy. I just buy up all the property I could. And this goes back to the beginning of our conversation. At the end of the day, I'm still a kid who grew up in the woods of Tennessee. And one of the things I love about Ashland is we love our open space. And like I said, one of the things I've really championed is preserving it. And yeah, I would buy up as much as I could. We could then decide what we wanted to do with it.
Love that. So the first, give it to the schools. They need it. The second, the schools for the most part, but then also building and grounds. And then with all the money in the world, we're talking buy up all the all the land. After that, so do you guys? It sounds like I've heard it a couple of times. Do you guys have a lot of municipal land? Owned?
We do actually. I'd say about 1/3 of Ashland's land area is open space and protected open space, and some of it's not necessarily held by the town, but it might be held in private ownership, and we've got a deed restriction that prevents development on there. Another tool I've used is development agreements to set aside portions of land as open space if something's being developed. Yeah, it's something we value very highly here. We actually won an award back in 2021, I think from Polco and ICMA, the National a Voice of the People Award for our open space work.
Yeah, I like how it kind of tied the podcast from the beginning to now. Michael, wow, this has been incredible.
Have fun.
But before we close, yeah, it's been a good time. I'd love to hear if there's any last words you'd like to share to our viewers.
Yeah, I think it's important as a human being, not just a town manager or in local government. to invest and know yourself and what makes you tick and what drives you and what are your values? What are the principles that you would die for? Knowing that about yourself gives you a solidness in character and a solidness of direction that is honestly priceless. So take the time to know yourself.
Yeah, I can agree with that on a deeper level. When I talk to my therapist, like one of the things that we always go back to is my core values, the things that I believe in, and just always like making decisions. How does it fit? Is this something that is going to align with your core values? So I believe in what you said, and I'm a practitioner myself. So on that note, Michael, I just want to again say thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey, your experiences, and thank you for fielding some questions that I didn't even know I had that I learned throughout the podcast. And then to all the viewers, thank you as well. Again, I am Jonathan Mason, your host of the Gentry Podcast, and with me today has been Michael Herbert, who is the town manager of the town of Ashland in Massachusetts. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks.